Recording. So, well, welcome back to webinar number 3. As you can see, we are in our final webinar out of the 3 sessions, and then we're really going to focus just on those math teaching practices 5 through 8 this evening. I don't think I have anything else that.
No. She's Alicia Court. I'm Lynn Shaw, both teachers in New London.
Yep. So obviously we're going to be talking about purposeful questions, always getting to the fabulous conversation of this whole conceptual understanding and procedural fluency, and what that kind of really entails.
That's a hot topic at the elementary level. We will identify different instructional strategies that promote problem solving and perseverance. We have a slew of things that I've already posted on Edmodo that you can take a look at later that we're going to be talking about. The idea there is that you're able to use them in your classroom. That will also aid in some of the things that we're talking about in this webinar. And then we're going to look at formative assessment techniques at the end of the webinar. It is a huge PowerPoint that we have to get through, so we are going to cruise ahead.
Yep, and lots of things that we're going to share with you today. This is a very meaty webinar session. So as you can see, here are those 8 math teaching practices. We've already touched on the first 4 of them, and as you can see in the purple, we're going to, like we just stated, focus really on the last 4.
So the definition from of math teaching practice number 5 is posing purposeful questions. So it's the effective teaching of mathematics using purposeful questions to assess and advance students' reasoning and sense making. So it's the way that you are going to pose questions to them. It's really funny in my math class, students don't necessarily always want to come and ask me for help because they get a question rather than an answer. So I answer a question with a question, and I think this is, that's part of this piece. So I think it's important.
And even at my level, they're very accustomed to thinking that somebody's going to give them an answer right away, and then they kind of look at you like, what? Why are you asking me a question right away? But I'm kind of the one that's planting that seed, so that way when hopefully by the time they get to Lynn, then we don't kind of have that deer in the headlights kind of look.
Oh, it's still there.
That's because I haven't been there as long.
It's still there right now, but this is hard. It's really hard, especially I think that this is really difficult if you've been doing this, and I've been doing this forever, even prior to, WISME or anything. I mean, I've always done this where I've asked why and what are you doing and how do you know it? And I think kids struggle with that if they come from a classroom where that's not the way it works. So they get frustrated and they tend to want to give up, and often will say that you're not willing to help them, and that's not true. But anyway, it's great because it makes them think.
So along with those purposeful questions, this actually comes from Principles to Actions book on pages 36 and 37. You can kind of see different types of question types over on the left, and then there are some examples that you can kind of see there. And I think we've kind of just gotten the habit of kind of tweaking those questions a little bit. I know over the years, have really tried to focus on, am I doing a great job with my questioning, or am I asking more of the yes, no, like a very basic kind of question, but doesn't really have the students kind of think much deeper, where now I kind of, like Lynn said, kind of purposely pose different questions so that way the kids are thinking in a different way and thinking a little bit deeper, and it's not me giving an answer right away. Right.
I do think too, when you do this, I had an administrator here actually last year tell me that they thought maybe it would be a good idea to pose my purposeful questions prior to the activity that we were doing. And I tried it, and that didn't work very well. I think in my classroom, I get a better discussion from my students when I do it after they do the activity. When I gave them the questions beforehand, the discussion wasn't as good, I think. So there are different ways so that you could do it. I thought it was worth trying because I was curious to see what would happen, but my experience has been that it isn't great. But I think that these are really important.
Absolutely. So again, this is from Principles to Actions. What are the teachers really going to be doing? You can kind of see there on that left. We're making certain that those questions go beyond just that gathering information to kind of that probing and clarifying, where the students, in essence, are really kind of thinking about their responses. They're coming up with other questions too, to kind of also ask their peers, like, well, why did you do that? Or justifying that answer and stuff. So as you kind of think about it and peruse through these, like, what do you want to work towards as you reflect on the type of questioning you have been doing in your classroom? What do you want even your students to be working towards? Because I think it's a double-edged sword there. It's not only what are we going to do, but also what do we want our students to be basically exemplifying.
Right. I think, you know, in the book, there's one part that it talks about funneling, like funneling questions where you are kind of leading them to where you want them to go. And it was saying that it alluded to that it was something that you shouldn't do. But I think that as a teacher, sometimes you have to do that depending on the group of students that you have in your classroom. And I think then from there, we just don't want you to stay in that funneling stage where it's, you know, question, real quick answer. We want you to, you can use that, but then you got to pop back out of that and go to a more meaningful question technique. But it is true. When you do a lot of collaborative work in the classroom and have discourse, you will see kids then use this, and they'll hear the things that I ask them, and they'll start asking their peers those same questions. So it's really very powerful.
We kind of touched upon it too last week, you know, that whole like waiting time and, you know, giving them time to kind of think about it. I think this comes about too when you're posing those purposeful questions, not just that quick answer right away, but really kind of thinking that, oh, they might need a little bit of time to kind of process and think about how they're going to really elaborate on what they're thinking. I know I'm sometimes guilty of trying to get an answer quickly, and then I have to remind myself, no, you want your students to take a little bit of time to really, you know, siphon through those questions. Obviously, it's not going to take a whole class period, but, you know, giving them time to really process what you're asking them.
Yeah, I struggle with wait time.
I think we all do.
Yeah.
So here is actually a video that we found of just a nice math class that is posing purposeful questions. So
I'm going to try to get this working.
Hoping it will go through.
There it is.
Oh, just wait 1 second. I'm going to get
Down here.
Lynn's volume up a little bit.
There you go.
Oh, don't want to blast you.
So then I divided 375 to even 25, and then I subtracted 25 by 79. Very nice. And what is k equals 25? What does 25 represent, Danielle? Years and months, days. Nice job. Very nice. Nice method. Now, what approach did you see, Annabella, different there? Okay. Interesting. They should get the correct answer. That makes sense. So far, they've made sense. Okay, Ernesto, let's hear from you. Okay, so it kind of sounds like just like you said, you focused on Kyogo.
Yeah.
Okay, so Kyogo's 25. Let's go back to the problem. The Steve was 4 years more than twice as old as Kyogo. If there's some. Now here, what do you recommend that you do here? He did the correct process here. Okay, and you got 3K. you got it. Good. Then now explain how you got C for him. Which is the CD. You want, yeah, call on your partner. Call on your partner. Nessa, you can call on your partner too. Get your partner up here. And work on it together. Represent that problem.
So what we're going to do is we're actually going to post the rest of this video. We want to just give you a little snippet of it. It's kind of hard with everybody getting, oh, wrong one. Sorry. There we go. With having everybody talk at one time, but we want you to kind of chat out. You know, we're in this math teaching practice number 5 of posing purposeful questions. What did you notice, even from the little snippet of this video, that you noticed this teacher was doing with those types of purposeful questions we were talking about? You just want to chat that out.
Our one
And I think it's just,
or you could talk to us if you want, because you're the only one.
hi, Hillary.
Sorry, I muted myself so you couldn't hear the noise.
No, you're
Oh,
good.
that's good.
And no one else came back, so maybe something else came up.
Okay. Well, I just saw her like you were saying, she wasn't telling them the answer, but then gathering like information from all the kids on how, and because she had the 3 strategy, like it looked like 3 examples up there already, and then so she was having them kind of talk with each other and how can we help him, instead of, you know, like I always see myself as saying, oh, what did they do wrong or something? But she wasn't going that way. She never said anything was wrong. She just said, how could we change this, that type of thing.
Right.
And then asking the whole class instead.
Yep, and I noticed too, like what she did is she's like, well, does anybody have any way that they change it, you know? Because then the kids are usually very quick at pointing out like, well, that can't happen. And so then it, like you said, it's not me necessarily saying it, but it's coming from a student. And I think that gives ownership to both those kids then, because now for some reason they can pick up so easily what the peer is saying, but not what the teacher is saying. So even though it's the exact same lingo.
Kids learn best from kids.
I know. So
I think,
that's a really good thing to kind of pick up on.
I also think that I like what she did when she had them kind of try to explain what somebody else did. What do you think he did here? You know, or what did she do here? And she had him try to explain somebody else's work. That's hard for kids. And it's very, sometimes can be very intimidating, especially if you have varying levels in your classroom. But it really can be extremely beneficial and powerful, because they'll start to see oh, I think I get it now, you know, where if I'm doing it, they tune me out after 7 minutes, but if it's with their peers, they're not doing that as much. So that's pretty powerful too, I think.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. All right, well, we're gonna keep trucking on, Hillary. So we'll see you soon. There. So we kind of discussed that a little bit and what we noticed with Hillary. So here you can kind of see there's really major shifts in the Common Core State Standards of Mathematics. We're really having this more of a focus, this coherence, you know, across the grade bands, and a coherence even within your own grade, and then this rigor. And that rigor really applies that conceptual understanding, that procedural fluency and skill, and then actually applying it. In the United States, we were really good with really focusing on that fluency. And if you think of that rigor kind of like a 3-legged stool, we put so much on that fluency and getting it rote and getting it fast, that when you have that, your stool really comes unbalanced, because one leg is only being pulled on and the other 2 are like out. So then it topples. What the Common Core State Standards of Mathematics is really trying to focus on is really having a strong 3-legged stool, if you will, if you need a visual analogy, to really have all 3 of those components working together to really have a rich math class. Right.
I think her analogy for rigor is really good. I think what's interesting to me, and I think what I'm finding really difficult, and I'm in my 25th year of teaching 7th grade math in some way, shape, or form in some place. And for the last 17 years, well, 18 years ago, I guess, was for 17 of those years I was in Bonduelle, where I was the one and only 7th grade math teacher. And here in New London, I'm not. And I think that coherence across, not just within across grade levels, but within your own grade, that's hard. That's a challenge for me, because I know where I want to go and I know what I want to do and I know what I know. But there are people that don't always, on your team or whatever that you're working with that aren't maybe at that same place, or are not understanding it the same way you are, or don't want to, that's hard. It's really, really challenging. So I wish there was a magic wand there, but I do think it's super important. So.
Absolutely. So again, we come back to that whole braid that we had actually in our, I believe this came up in our first webinar, this math teaching practice 6 of really building that procedural fluency and conceptual understanding. As you can see, there's that braid that we had discussed, and we are kind of focusing on that conceptual understanding right now, but we can't just pull on one thread, because like we discussed on the first slide or the first webinar, is it will fall apart. So even though you're kind of really building that idea of fluency and conceptual understanding, you have all 5 of these intertwined and working together.
Right.
So this is our first one that we had.
This is a like a Freyer model, I guess. Right, I think I'm in where I'm supposed to be. It is a nice way for you to, and this example is just conceptual understanding, but you can put anything that you want in there. I use this in my math classes, especially in geometry. It works out really well when I'm talking about different shapes, different figures, and so you have a spot for them to write the definition, and then they have to write some facts or characteristics, and then they have to give examples of it, and then they have to give some non-examples. And that's hard sometimes for students to do, depending on what you're talking about. So simplistically, if you would think of I'm trying to think like square. If square is going to be your shape, okay, you would have the definition of what makes up a square, and then characteristics of it. Opposite sides are parallel, all sides are equal, 4 90-degree angles, and then you'd have some examples of what a square is. Well, there's only one. There's a square. And then non-examples, what are things that are not a square? That would be like a rectangle or any other quadrilateral or circle. This gets really interesting, and the reason I picked square is because you could also do the opposite, and if you have rectangle, an example of a rectangle could also be a square, because a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square. Just recently I did this we are just finishing up today. We just finished up proportional and non-proportional relationships in ratios and proportions. And we talked about what is slope, which is really a no-no word for 7th grade, but what is slope and what is the constant of proportionality. Well, the constant of proportionality is slope when it's a proportional relationship and it goes to the origin. But slope is not necessarily constant of proportionality, because slope is any line that's linear on a coordinate plane that has some sort of incline or decline, depending on what you're talking about. So they were struggling with that, so I used one of these for that, and it was great. And they were able to then see it and show non-examples of it, and it becomes very visual. So this is a great opportunity for you to use something to show that. So.
So again, this is just another idea of, that Freyer model. And as we're kind of thinking about this conceptual understanding, these were just some different ideas that you could come up with that in mind. What does that actually mean? What are the facts and characteristics of conceptual understanding? What doesn't that look like? And then can you give some examples? This is always even a fun thing to do if you have a math meeting and stuff, and you kind of put it out for your team. And then you have a great, rich discussion about, well, what does that look like? How Lynn had said, maybe not everyone is on the same page. Well, maybe if everybody designed one of these and then you shared out, maybe then you can see, oh, here are some differences, and this is maybe where we need to go, and this is how we're going to get everybody on the page as far as what conceptual understanding means, or any other topic that you have.
Right, and you have to be careful, because like I was at a Brook Hill geometry professional development last spring, and it was with people from all over the state that were amazing math people, from Madison and UW La Crosse, UW whitewater all over Oshkosh and Milwaukee, everywhere. And the topic came up about a trapezoid. And that, oh my gosh, it was so funny to see these, these really amazing math people in the state argue about whether a trapezoid is considered, I lost my train of thought now, considered, oh no, it was the definition of a trapezoid. It was, is a trapezoid quadrilateral with a set of parallel lines, or is it a quadrilateral with at least one set of parallel lines? And that was the discussion. It was awesome. It was because I always said at least one set, meaning a square then could be considered whatever. So anyway, this is a neat thing for something like that too. Gotta be careful.
Here's another kind of idea that we had discussed with conceptual understanding. The whole idea of time tests that always comes up, and also this whole idea of cute little posters that you see on the side over there. Yes, it's a great memorization tool. However, when we're really trying to build that conceptual understanding, we kind of have to look back again. Does it really become a memorization of like a little chime or a rhyme, or do they really have to understand what that quantity is? That's what we're really trying to get at, is do they understand the quantity, the different parts that are within that number, and how that number then can be worked through, especially when you're multiplying or dividing or,
right.
In my case, adding and subtracting, and what happens with your extra ones and your tens and everything like that. So we really kind of have to understand, what does conceptual understanding mean, and what is that going to really look like? I don't think it means that it's going to be a rote, fast thing. When it comes to time tests, I try to do mine even differently. We have to do something like a time test. It's called a fluency check. However, I don't do you have 7 minutes and go and get all these problems and then we'll kind of graph it. I do a time up where kids can really have as much time as they want, within reason. Obviously, we're not going to spend 30 minutes on one for 15 problems. However, they can have as much time, and when they're done, then I actually put the time at the top, and I have discussions with them. Hey, I want you to see, at the beginning of the year, you took 3 minutes to complete 15 problems. Now you're only taking a minute. What do you notice? How is that happening? And then I also mark at the top strategies that I see them using. Like if they're using their fingers, I put an F at the top.
Mm-hmm.
If they're counting on, I put a CO. So different ways that I then can tell parents, these are the strategies I'm seeing your child using. These are some that I would like to continue working with, because part of that conceptual understanding is also knowing strategies that they're familiar with, but also strategies that they know to use with certain types of problems.
Right. And I think, the little thing at the right, I do some sing, like Jen Koziak she wrote a song in the RP module about the cross product method and why we do it. And so I'll sing things like that to help them kind of remember them. And there's nothing wrong with that. And these little things, there's nothing wrong with it. The problem with the poster at the right is that students don't know. They don't understand place value. And then they get to 7th grade and I'm doing number talks and they're trying to do this algorithm for adding a 2-digit number plus a 2-digit number, and they say, well, you carry a 1. Okay, is that a 1? Yeah, it's a 1. No, it's not a 1, it's a 10. Or, they don't.
And you get precision of
yes,
language
it really is,
with your math practices.
Right, it's really tough. So something like that, is cute and it's gets kids to remember exactly what they have to do next, but they struggle so much with what that really means. And then when they if they do it over and over and over again, then they fall behind with that later. So it just becomes a problem, I think.
So here are some other ideas that we just kind of brainstormed. We talked about that Freyer model concept map. A lot of these we're actually going to kind of show you, and they're also up in Edmodo as we go through strategies for building conceptual understanding, but also that you could use with your other math areas.
I think all of these are things that we have done in one, Alicia and I have done in one way or another. So, but yeah.
So again, this is it for your model that we had just showed you. All of these are in Word documents. I think we said that, I'm not sure, but is out there.
So this is an example of one that I would use and show and model in my classroom. Okay, proportional relationships. So they have the definition. What is a property of a proportional relationship? It's linear, and it goes to the origin. That's a big deal in 7th grade. And as a teacher of 7th grade, and I've always loved math. I never really thought about that until I went to a WSME for RP, and that is huge, So looking at that, and then looking at the examples of what are some equations that would look, y equals equations that would look like that. So where in proportional relationships, my students, hopefully, they just took a test today, but they would be able to tell you that the coefficient 3.5 or the 2 or the 0.5, that those would be examples of K, or constant of proportionality. And then they would know that the non-examples are non-examples because those problems eventually, now my students, we haven't done anything with this, but I did this awesome task, and I put the link up there last week or the week before. It's called Yummy Math, and there's a task in there called, it's a diaper task, and it's so phenomenal because it has kids look at the cost that is spent on diapers that are cloth and diapers that are disposable.
Oh, cool.
It's such an awesome activity. But in the end, they have to graph it, and they have to say whether it's a proportional relationship or not. And kids will come to the realization that that +4 or that -3 is where it crosses the y-axis. And they'll never forget it because they know that then. So they know that the slope or the constant proportionality is the coefficient with the x, but then that the plus or minus whatever is where it's going to cross that axis. So, it's pretty meaningful. But this is just an example of something that we've done in my room.
So concept circles is another strategy that you could use within your classroom. I know, have you used them?
I've used them in geometry. Everything's applicable to geometry. But yes, I've used it. So you name the relationship. So if you look in the left, this is one that we've done with angles. So you have complementary, vertical, supplementary, alternate, interior, and they have to tell you what they are, what the relationship is. I do that a lot with shapes too. Especially when in 7th grade, 6th grade, they talk about just essentially cubes really for a 3-dimensional figure. And in 7th grade, we get into different types of prisms. So it can be, trapezoidal prism, octagonal prism, just a regular square prism, a rectangular prism. So you might put something like that on there, and I would put pictures, and then they would have to name, their connection and name what they are. The odd one out too is another great one, which this one is you can do where you fill up the circle with different things, and they have to pick the one that doesn't fit. And then and I always make my students write. So what I do when I do these, what I do is I make a bunch of copies. Everybody gets a different one, and they're mixed up. So some of them may have the same things on them, but they're different, so that they're not necessarily sitting by somebody. And sometimes they'll have them do it with a partner too. I guess it just depends. And then they'll get that, and then what they'll have to do is on a sheet of paper, they'll have to, or on the back, if you're going to let them keep it, they have to tell you what the relationship is, and how they know and justify it. And then the same thing with odd one out, which one doesn't fit, why doesn't it fit, and justify their thinking and reasoning. So it's a great tool. So, and it's easy to do.
So here's a compare and contrast graphic organizer. It kind of looks a little bit smeary here, but we had the area and perimeter. And then they have to tell how are they alike in that middle rectangle, and then also how are they different. And if you notice, they also give examples kind of as the arrows are kind of coming down to kind of show and justify some of their work and their thinking.
This is modeling math meaningfully. This is just another strategy that you can do with any topic really of your choosing. So you can put some sort of thing that you want to do. So if I'm doing proportional relationships, what would a proportional relationship look like with numbers? And so students might write, like points on a graph, so they might have 1, 2, or even a ratio table, even for that matter, with the numbers and showing it at that constant rate. And then they draw a picture of it. Well, my students, if you would ask them to draw a picture of a proportional relationship, they're going to put it on a coordinate plane and having it going through the straight linear and going through the origin. And then they have to use it in a word problem. That's hard for kids to do. Really, really challenging, because they don't view math language as language that you would use in everyday life. Even though everything I do is word problems for the most part, they just don't really view it as everyday life. And so they have a really hard time creating a story problem of their own. and then how they would model it and tools that they would use to solve it. So this is a great tool again. It just gets them talking and gets them explaining what they're doing. We have 4 people.
Yay, welcome, friends.
In the center is where I put the thing that we're talking about. So, and I don't know why that, and this isn't one that, this is one we took off of online. Mine, I think that I have, has the box in the middle is just open. There's no crosses in it, but that's the thing that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, keep in mind, this could be something that you do in one class. This is something that could go on a couple of different classes. It depends on what you're kind of doing with your topic, and then also maybe what you're even doing at the time with your students.
We have a social studies teacher in our building that is using math as part of her social studies, part of her goal for her SLO and math achievement. And so anytime I have anything that she could utilize in her class, that's what she does. And we've done things like this with proportional relationships. So they would then in social studies have to find an example of something that they have that they're talking about that is a proportional relationship. And it's a nice opportunity for students to see that math is not only in math class, it's also in other classes. And if you're an elementary teacher, you know, wonderful people who I bow down to because I would never want to do that, but you teach everything, so you can easily do that. So I don't know. I just think it's kind of a neat way of doing it. And anytime my kids write all the time in math. They don't always like it, but they do it.
So here is actually another chart that we have. This is a fluency check that I've used. You can use it for other things too. But like kind of going back where I had talked about my fluency checks that I have to do. This is something that I created, just a chart for my students too. And it helps me kind of see the strategies that students are using. This could be created for any topic that you have that you're coming back to multiple times, and you have different strategies that your students are going to be completing. All you have to do is then kind of see when was the check in with the students? What notes do you have? You know, I like to keep a box where it has all my strategies there that are very common that we use. Mm-hmm. And then I can just quickly circle what I saw on that day. And I might just add to it in a different color, so that way I can kind of see, okay, they're still using these strategies, or maybe they tried something different. That's just another tool that I like to use within my class.
There's also an online tool that's somewhat similar to that, because I started doing something like that when I was trying to track when I see them doing the math practices, because I like to keep track of who has got those practices and who's utilizing them and who is not. And then I've also done it with the standards to show whether I think this student is capable of or understands and has a good mastery of a standard. There is an online app if you use Apple. That's the, I forget what it's called. I'm looking on my phone right now.
Somebody in one of my WISME sessions this summer actually came up with this fantastic idea. We got talking about math practices. And I have my math practices up in my room, and I refer to them with my students, and you know, we talk about how somebody's modeling a certain practice. And they said that they actually have the kids' problem and their name, and they put it up on their math practice. So that way I can see what students are hitting those math practices, but then also the students can see, oh my goodness, do you remember when Isaac, he modeled his mathematics? And this was the problem that he used it in. And then we do a little drawing and stuff. So that's a great way to kind of look at what strategy they're using as well.
The app that I use is called Common Core Look Fors, and you can enter students' names in there. And so periodically, as they're working on a task, I'll walk around and I'll notice. You can put their name right in there and identify when they are doing it and when they're not doing it. And you can track it, which is very cool, because then, you know, when somebody comes back to you at some point maybe and says, okay, you know, has so-and-so, or at conferences, I just bring out my iPad during conferences and say, well, this is when I've seen this student do this, and this. And so it's just a nice little tool. So it's pretty beneficial. And I've used that for years.
We'll add that out on Edmodo too, just so you have that app as well and what to look for. We'll put a visual of it too, so you know what the app actually looks like too.
Sure.
So again, here's another type of strategy thing that you could use with, do you want to talk about that
Sure.
one?
This is the journalist question. So the who, what, when, where, why, how. This is something that I've used. This is an example of the metric system. Now, we don't really do a ton of conversion anymore in middle school and in our standards, but
It's in fourth grade.
yeah, which is
Lots in
crazy.
fourth, lots
know?
in fourth, a little in third, some in fifth. Yeah.
But students, we talk a lot about the movement of the decimal point, you know, and we get into that a lot in 8th grade because they have scientific notation and moving it positively and negatively. And I just actually today had a discussion because we're moving on to percentages, fractions, decimals, percents, and percents in the second part of RP. And at that point, you know, why the kids are like, well, you just move the decimal over, or you multiply by 100, or you multiply by 10. And well, why do we do that? And this was my accelerated class. They couldn't tell me. They didn't know that, you know, that our number system is based on 10, and that's what makes that so much easier. And, you know, we have this discussion about the metric system. So this is just some kind of a little example of something you could do. And you could really do this with almost anything.
So again, you know, kind of thinking about just questions to consider, you know, what are the benefits of building that conceptual understanding alongside that procedural fluency? You know, we'll post that up onto Edmodo just so you have some time to kind of reflect on that, because I think that's really key into thinking, you know, procedural fluency isn't just on its own. We really have to build that conceptual understanding alongside of it to really help our students really have a sound math understanding.
Yeah, they have to understand the why, or they're never going to be good problem solvers. And if they can't, you know, I live in Bonduelle, and there's a KI plant in Bonduelle, and the woman from KI came and talked to us because she said, you're sending us students that can solve algebraic equations or mathematical equations well when they're given to them. But when given a real life problem where I need you to solve this situation, they can't do it. Because it's, you know, they want that kids are really good at that naked problem and how to solve that using those procedures, but they don't understand what that all means. And that's why it's so important, I think.
So procedural fluency, you know, it's defined as flexible, accurate, efficient, and appropriate with skill, you know, using a different type of skill or strategy with it. So kind of keep that in mind as we kind of think of that procedural fluency. Again, strategies for building that procedural fluency. We're going to get into a few of these as we keep going through.
So this is a strategy harvest. So this is just a word problem. And then this is an example of multiple representations. So that would be something that my students would actually, every single one of those things right now would be something my 7th graders should, I'll let you know how they do on their test later, should be able to do. You know, in A is just a visual of what they are. And that might be something, you know, that's a low level, but that's okay. That's why I like multiple representations, because there are so many different entry points for so many different kids, because there's none of us that have kids that are all at the same level. Even in my accelerated class, I have a vast degree of ability in my accelerated group. So, you know, that's A. B is a double number line. I don't know if you're familiar with a double number line, but I love, love, love double number lines. It really is, it's such an awesome tool. And, you know, it's kind of set up like you would set up maybe a proportion, but it's so much easier. And it really comes down to like equivalent ratios or equivalent fractions. Then, so that's B. C is a tape diagram. D then would also be your proportion. And then E is just a table, ratio table. I do tons of ratio tables. F is graphing. My students love, love, love to graph. They know that if it goes to the origin, and I know that they do because they just, they did a great job on that portion. So, you know, they know that it goes to the origin. If it does go through the origin, it is a proportional relationship, and it has a constant proportionality. So it's just going to be y over x, no matter what the point is. They just have to find one point. They don't have to do that calculation of slope. So that works out pretty nice. And then G would be algebra. So all of which they should be able to do if given that word problem.
So this is another game that we've seen, the game 24. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It actually comes in many varieties, you know, from elementary all the way up into high school. And there's so many different things you can do with this game. We actually found that it is $19.95 if you buy it and stuff. And the games, I think, is so key. Like, if you give time for kids to do the games and to practice some of these ideas, I feel like they ingrain that so much more if you take some of that time for it.
And 24, the cool thing about 24, I don't know, I've used it a lot. They have adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. They do have squaring, square rooting. They have algebra ones and exponents, and it's awesome. But the cool thing about it is it has those dot levels. So you can differentiate using one game, and it's cool, and it's a lot of fun. And you know what? That's something you can pull out and do in 10, 15 minutes. If you have, just a few extra minutes, and pull it out, and kids really like doing it, and they're practicing the things that they need to practice.
So in this, we're just kind of, again, going back to what are we kind of looking for with our teachers' actions and our students' actions. We'll kind of post that out also on Edmodo as to what are you kind of looking towards as you're really building that procedural fluency from conceptual understanding. For me, that just takes time to kind of reflect on and stuff with that, because that's a heavy idea and everything.
It's a hot topic. Time tests are big in some schools and school districts, and it's important that they know their facts, but it's a battle. And there's a video that I put on Edmodo that's called Ellie. It's a TED Talk with Ellie, and she talks about how she thought she was this amazing math student who went to college and majored in math, and then she realized that she was gypped out of a math education because she could do the procedure and she could do it quick and accurately, they always told her she was a very good math student, and she found out that she didn't really understand math, and she thought that she was gypped. So if you get a chance to check that out, that video is amazing, and it tells you why we need to change the way that we're teaching.
So we're down to our last few minutes. We still have a lot of things to kind of go through and show you. So we're going to just power through our last couple of math teaching practices. So we have number 7, that productive struggle. We talked about it before, and we're talking about it again. It's okay for our students to have a little bit of that struggle. Not that they're, bawling in the corner thinking that they can't do math, but at the same time, a little bit of a challenge or having a problem, maybe wait even overnight and say, what, we're going to put a pin in this and we're going to come back to it tomorrow. I do that with my students, and they are like coming in, chomping at the bit the next morning, like, hey, I think I know what to do on that problem. And I'm like, just wait for math time. But I think just wait for math time. Like,
that doesn't happen in 7th grade.
They do like it.
I do think that productive struggle is really difficult, because I think that, I don't know. I think that we have some kids that are sometimes, what's the word? They are enabled for too long, and I think that they have that, that I'm just not going to do it. They learn helplessness kind of thing, and so this is a really hard to initially do.
So again, here are just some different, a quote from Eggleton and Moldovan. I always mess that up. This was taken from the Journal of Mathematics Teaching Education. That helping students confront their errors and resolve that incongruity. The mistakes are a source of learning and sense making, and it's okay for them to struggle a little bit. But I think the big key here is we're going to try to change their statements of I don't get it to I don't get it yet. That they're not just going to give up, but they're actually going to continue to move forward to really understand it.
Right.
So this is Lynn's my favorite no.
So my favorite no is a strategy that you can use. Where I am here on my list, that you can use in your classroom. It is a strategy that we'll put up also on Edmodo, but what's wrong with it? If you look at this, and there's actually a video, I think, that goes with it that explains it, that will show.
Yeah, I'm going to put that up.
Yeah, we will attach that on Edmodo. And this teacher does a great job of showing how you use it. But essentially, what do you know? What don't you know? Is there anything that's wrong? And it goes back to that discussion that we were having earlier about explaining student work and finding errors in student work. There's a great tool out there called, I can't remember. Oh, I'm having such a, I'll remember later, but there's something that you can use that will allow you to, and I'll put it up on Edmodo too, that will allow you to be able to show student work that they do on a computer, which isn't always ideal. I'm one-to-one here in my 7th grade math class with Chromebooks. So writing with a mouse is not easy, but you can then flash a student's work up on the screen without their name being there, and students can then explain their writing. And, so it's an awesome tool to use too, if you like technology.
So we have, kind of thinking about those reflection questions, ask questions that help students kind of focus on their thinking. Those probing, those clarifying questions, like, what do you know about this problem? What is challenging about it? What have you already tried? Sometimes having them look back at the steps that they've already used does help them kind of be like, oh, well, I could try this now. Or even kind of just saying, with another approach, that sometimes can help them through some of that struggling.
Yeah.
And those reflection questions just really help them kind of reflect on the work that they've already done, and helps them to kind of explain their thinking and what they're just not getting yet. I think so we as teachers also have to give time and help our students kind of manage a little bit of, it's all right to struggle through a problem. It's okay to not get it right away. Kind of like, Lynn had said, that learned helplessness, we want to try to help them oversee that just because it's a struggle doesn't mean that they are bad at math, or they're never going to get it, or they're going to fail, or anything like that. It's just that they need to have a little bit of time to work through their problems, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think my big thing here is that and we all get caught up in I have all these things I have to get through, and I don't have enough time to do all of what I need to do. And sometimes you have to maybe pick and choose what is really important and maybe what's not. Because I do think that it's important that you give them that time to struggle through it and to learn through it themselves. Otherwise, they're never going to get it, and they're never going to get it well. So
we're going to keep going through, this is one of our favorite little comics. You have to solve this problem by yourself. You can't call tech support. And I think that just kind of applies to, that struggle is okay, and it's important, and it's part of that natural part of learning. So this is right out of Principles to Actions book as well, kind of thinking about that productive struggle as you're learning mathematics. What are the teachers doing and the students doing? You've seen this in your reading. Math teaching practice 8, finding evidence of that student thinking.
So teachers using assessment for learning continually look for ways in which they can generate evidence of student learning, and they can use evidence to adapt their instruction to better meet their students' learning needs. Formative assessment, I think, is the key here. I do, at every lesson I have a formative assessment that I give the students, and it's just a 1 or 2, 3 question, little mini quiz, although it's not really a quiz, but they view it as quiz, on whether they understand the concepts that was just taught. And then that ideally should guide your instruction, and then give you opportunities to determine who you need to work with in smaller groups to make sure that they understand. So
sorry, I was slacking on that. I think also it comes back to, thinking of the quality of this, not the quantity of it. You gotta really kind of think about that.
It kind of goes back to the previous slide too.
So these are a couple of ideas that we had come up with. Agreement circles is a great way to kind of help with math teaching practice 8, where you're reading a statement, the students are going to circle if they agree, move to an inner circle if they disagree, and then they have to actually discuss it with each other and almost try to justify their reasoning and thinking. This is another example that we've kind of seen of that concept sort, when you have students kind of organizing their thinking of characteristics, and you can kind of see in these 2 different pictures, how they were justifying their reasoning and what they were thinking, and then just allowing a little bit of time for that gallery walk to have people kind of reflect on what other people's thoughts were.
Yeah, it gives kids a good way of seeing. If you I'll do this a lot when I do posters in my room, and if they're working on a word problem. So it gives them an opportunity to reflect on other students' work and to see what they did in different ways that they solve problems.
Here's just another one, what's my strategy, and showing different methods. I think this kind of reflected back on the video that we kind of showed earlier, and then getting some of those good productive questions out of what they were thinking and sharing it with the class.
This is exit slips. I do exit slips every single lesson in a variety of ways. I have both the red, yellow, and green basket, and I also have the paper plates that I've done. The paper plates are cool, but they tend to get messy and hard to do. But essentially what I would do is I would do a exit slip and give the kids a problem, and they have to solve the problem on I use recipe cards, and then they put it in the basket. And the basket is green, yellow, and red, just like a stoplight. If they're green, they got it, they understand it, they should know it, they put it in green. If they're yellow, meaning that they think they get it, but they might have a couple questions, it goes there. And if they have no clue, then it goes in red. And that's kind of where they get to justify where they think they belong. Kids are hard on themselves, though. So a lot of times they'll say that they're yellow or red when they really are not. So, But exit slips are a great tool to decide where you need to go.
So again, just kind of coming back to the teacher and student actions and just kind of reflecting on, like, what do you want to work towards as you're looking for evidence of student thinking. This video we're actually going to put out on Edmodo as well, of just a great math classroom that we thought was a great share for you. So we'll have that out there. If you have any questions on tonight's webinar, we'll be around for a little bit. Otherwise, we want to thank you for coming and meeting with us. Ooh, it already went back. These last 3 weeks, we've really enjoyed our time with you. And please check out Edmodo. We already started uploading a few things, but please come back and look at a few other things that we'll upload again tonight. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. And hopefully you can use some of the things that we gave you. If you have questions, you can post questions, or if you want to chat, you can chat, whatever you would like to do. So.
Thank you. Yep, the actual presentations, all three of them are up on Edmodo.
The videos are, not the PowerPoints. The PowerPoints will not be on Edmodo, but the items that we talked about tonight and any of the sites that we've referenced and copies of the video link, I upload the videos that we are doing, because we're recording ourselves as we're doing this, to my YouTube, and then I put that out on a link to that out on Edmodo. So you can watch the video again, but not the PowerPoints. The PowerPoints will not be available on Edmodo. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yep, no problem. Thanks. All right, if there's no other questions, we're just going to sign off and hope you have a great rest of your school year. Take care.